Let's examine how we can build an internal tool on top of our Airtable data using internal. Here, we have an Airtable base that tracks the applicants applying to our company. Note that we're taking advantage of Airtable's linked records in the applying for column. These all point to records that come from a different table called positions. Now, I'm going to show you how you can build a custom UX to better manage and update this data in a controlled way. Now, let's switch over to internal. In internal, let's go ahead and add our first component, which is going to be a table. Now, we're going to select the data source. In this case, we can pick the Airtable base that we added. And the function that we want to perform is to list the applicant's records. And so now you can see that we've pulled in a bunch of data all from our Airtable. There's a couple of fields that we don't need, so we can go ahead and hide record ID. That's kind of the unique identifier for each record in Airtable. We're going to hide applying for as well because we're going to pull in that data from that other table and show it in a different way. We don't need some fields such as why do you want to work for us, as well as the phone, interview, and on-site interview fields, or headshot. We can click on a field like stage, and we can change how we display this. In this case, we can add some formatting with pillboxes. So pillboxes allow us to specify a color and then specify different display names and different values that should show up. So let's make green higher. Let's make red no higher. We'll make yellow our on-site interview, and then we'll make gray phone interview. Now you can see all of those values and the pillboxes show up in Stage. We can also go ahead and change our LinkedIn field to be automatically linked. So now that will take you directly to their profile. Now let's add another component. Since we want to see what position this person's applying for, let's go ahead and add a detail component that will display that information. So we'll go and select the applicant tracking system again. Now this time what we want to do is we want to get a positions record. And in this case, we want to find the record ID of the position that they're applying for as a parameter. So what we can do is we can use a value from our component. And in this case, the component that we want to use is the applicants table. So let's grab the applicants table, the selected row, and then we're going to grab the applying for data. And that's going to pick up the applying for record from that other table and display it in here. We won't need the field record ID or applying for. And let's just change this to applying for as our title. Let's also add another detail component. This time, we're going to show more of our applicant information. Over here, we're going to get applicant's record. And we're going to do a similar thing to find the right applicant record, but this time, we're going to use a value from a component, and we're going to bind it to the table again. This time, we're going to match it to the record ID. And so this is going to pull in the same applicant and all their information. Let's call this applicant notes. And let's remove some of the fields that we don't need. So we don't need record ID, we don't need the name, we don't need stage, applying for, email address, phone, or LinkedIn, since that's all shown in the table. Let's go hide our headshot field, which contains a link to a headshot of that candidate. And what we can do instead is we can actually insert that image by using an image component here. And so to find the image URL we want to use, let's use insert a variable. And we're going to grab it from this detail view, the data within this detail view, and the headshot field. So now let's save and publish our tool and take a look at it. So you can see now, whenever we select an applicant in the applicants table, we get all of the position information from that other table that is displayed in this detail view here. And we also have a nice image with the headshot of our applicant, as well as all of the applicant notes within here. Now, let's go back and add a form so that we can manage our applicants. We're actually going to use two different forms depending on what stage the applicant's in. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is use a flexbox. And this is basically going to serve as a container for us to add our various forms in. So let's call it flex1, and let's go ahead and add our first form component. We're going to select that same applicant tracking system as our data source. And here we're going to want to update the applicant's record. We'll call this phone interview. We'll call this phone form. And so the record ID that we want to update is going to be whatever is selected here. So we'll go ahead and for our default value, we're going to bind it to a value from a component. Again, we're going to select the applicant's table and then the record ID there. And then we can make this a hidden field since we don't want the user to change it. Now let's go ahead and add some fields to our form. The first thing we want to do is add in the phone interview score. And this field, we can click on it to configure. We'll actually want this to be a dropdown. And here we can configure our dropdown first by entering in the display name, then a comma, then the actual value. So here you can see that we've set up our 0 to 4 point system as a dropdown here. Let's also add another field for the phone interview notes. And let's actually change this to a text area so it can be a bit long form. Next, let's add an option whether or not to move them ahead. We'll simply use the stage field to do that. And here we'll set it up as a radio button, and we're going to have two different options, either to move ahead to the next stage, which will be an on-site interview from the phone interview, or we can simply decline, which will change them into the no hire stage. Next, we can add an on-site interview. Note that this is automatically set to be a date time picker, so we don't need to change anything. All we need to do is allow this field to be blank, since if we're going to decline them, we won't actually be scheduling an on-site interview. Lastly, let's add another field for the on-site interviewer, since we want to select that at this stage. This will be another dropdown. And we're going to add a display name and actual value separated by commas, each on their own line, like so. And so we'll have all of these different people that match up exactly to the people in our Airtable multi-select fields here. And we're also going to allow this field to be blank. Now let's go over to the Effects tab. And we want to make it so that when we submit this form, we're actually going to refresh a couple of components so that we can see the updated data. One will be the applicant's table, and the other thing that we want to refresh is the applicant's record detail, which is the applicant notes over here. Finally, let's go back and add a visibility rule. We actually only want the phone form to show up if in the applicant's table the stage of the person that we have selected is equal to phone interview. So this is only going to show up now if they're in the phone interview stage. Let's go back up to our Flexbox and let's add another form. And we're going to choose the same items here, update applicants. We're going to call this the on-site form. And we're going to do the same thing for our record ID, where we're going to bind it to the table's record ID. Then we can go ahead and hide it. Now let's go ahead and add the fields that we want. We want to add our on-site interview score here. Once again, we're going to make this a drop down and we're going to set our 0 to 4, various values here. We're going to add our on-site interview notes and make it a text area. And finally, we are going to add stage as a radio button again. And we'll enter in our options here and note that since this is the on-site interview stage, it's simply a hire or a no hire decision. We'll go ahead and add that same visibility rule where we're going to use the applicants table and the stage. And make it equal to on-site interview. And so this form will show if they're in the on-site interview stage. Let's go back and have it refresh the applicants table as well as the applicants details. Let's go publish and check out how our tool works in action. Now you see when we click on anyone in phone interview, our phone interview form is visible. And you can note that compared to the setup that we had in Airtable, we can see the full record details for the position that they're applying for. We can view long form notes in a much easier format in this detail view. And we can use these forms to mitigate errors and control the way that our users interact with our data. We try and use this and move Kelly ahead to our next stage. We can schedule an on-site interview, and you can see our date picker pops up right here. And we can select an interviewer from our interviewer list. And when we go to update, we can see that Kelly has now been updated to an on-site interview, and the feedback that we input is now contained in our notes, and this form is now updated to the on-site interview. And again, we can change this and update the status once again, and you can see that Kelly has moved over to no hire. That's it. That's how you can use internal to build internal tools on top of Airtable.